Everyone tells us Copilot gives us instant AI insights worldwide, no extra fuss.
But the Model Context Protocol forces a separate AI runtime in every sovereign cloud.
So we're really talking about duplicating infrastructure across each region.
Exactly. Each duplicate adds credit burn, latency, and compliance work that eats the promised ROI.
Welcome to another deep dive here at CRM Position.
Glad to be here.
So our mission today is to cut through the vendor marketing claims and look directly under the hood at how Microsoft Dynamics Copilot's Federated Model Context Protocol, or MCP, actually operates in, global customer experience deployments.
Right, because if you manage a global CRM or a CX architecture, you've almost certainly been sold a very specific vision of seamless, frictionless AI integration.
Yeah, totally. You just turn it on and suddenly your data is smarter. But the source material we are examining today reveals a pretty massive caveat to that vision.
It really does.
The big reveal here is that the MCP isn't just a seamless global bridge. It acts as a hidden data residency tax. It is essentially transforming data sovereignty from a protective legal safeguard into a deliberate monetization layer for the vendor.
That's a great way to frame it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Thinking about what this actually looks like in practice, it's like being sold a single all-inclusive global rail pass, only to discover buried in the terms and conditions that you are legally required to fund, build, and staff an entirely separate train station in every single country you pass through.
Yeah, and the official diagrams certainly don't show all those extra train stations.
Right.
When enterprise architecture teams look at the marketing materials, they just see one clean Copilot interface.
And the natural assumption is that the back end handles all that regional complexity invisibly.
Exactly. But if we connect this to the actual legal reality of data sovereignty, the strict requirement that certain citizen data simply cannot leave its geographic origin, the architectural reality of the MCP completely diverges from the marketing narrative. Well, to honor local data laws without breaking the AI's ability to reason, the Model Context Protocol forces enterprises to spin up separate, fully isolated model runtime instances in every single sovereign cloud environment they operate in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we were talking about standing up distinct environments for Azure US Gov, Azure Germany, Azure Japan, and so forth.
So just to be crystal clear, we aren't just pinging a centralized, super smart AI brain in Seattle from different countries.
No, not at all.
We are literally cloning the brain, putting one in a data center in Frankfurt, putting another one in Tokyo, another in Virginia.
Exactly. And obviously, cloning enterprise infrastructure is never free.
Right.
The documentation here shows a staggering multidimensional financial reality. This requirement alone adds an entire additional infrastructure layer that inflates your cloud spend by roughly 15 to 25% per region.
Wait, really? 15 to 25% per region?
Per region. And those hard infrastructure costs, like the actual servers and storage, are just the baseline.
It gets worse.
It does. The financial impact aggressively compounds when you look at the Copilot credit burn multiplier.
Okay, break that down for me.
So consider a global Customer 360 connector. This is a very common tool designed to pull in data from various regional endpoints to give a support agent a unified view of a client.
Right. Standard CX stuff.
Standard stuff. But because that single connector is pulling data that spans multiple jurisdictions, it burns 2 to 3 times the Copilot credits of a standard single region connector.
2 to 3 times the credits for the exact same query, just because the customer's data happens to sit across different legal boundaries.
Yes, and the pricing details in our brief make this visceral.
Yeah, I saw that. The baseline cost is $200 per 25,000 credits, right?
Right, and if you are applying a 3 times multiplier to your highest volume global queries, say, thousands of customer service interactions a day, that scales up incredibly fast.
I can imagine.
Finance teams are finding out the hard way that they can no longer look at AI compute as a single global pool. That model is dead.
So they have to split it all up.
Yeah, they now have to forecast regional runtimes, regional credit allocations, and the specific compliance overhead required for each connector as completely separate line items.
Wow, the entire AI budget is fragmented.
Totally fragmented.
Which brings us to the operational performance. Because even if you have an infinite budget to pay this data residency tax, you still have to deal with the laws of physics.
Oh, the latency trap?
Right. The documentation outlines what it calls the latency and caching trap. Let's say you have an APAC customer experience analyst sitting in Singapore who queries a European-hosted customer profile connector.
Okay.
Because of those strict sovereign boundaries, the MCP has to marshal that request all the way to the European AI runtime, wait for the processing, and send the insight back.
Right, and that physical distance adds a 120 to 250 millisecond round-trip delay.
Which doesn't sound like much, but in the context of live CX operations, a quarter of a second is an absolute eternity.
It really is. Imagine a service agent on the phone with a highly frustrated customer. They're waiting for Copilot to provide real-time sentiment analysis or a next best action prompt to de-escalate the call.
Yeah, that 250 millisecond delay severely degrades the dashboard refresh rate. The system feels sluggish, the agent hesitates, and the customer experience suffers.
Exactly. So the natural engineering reflex to a latency problem is to say, well, we'll just cache the data locally.
Right, we bring a copy of the European data closer to the APAC user so the local AI can process it instantly.
But the brief explicitly highlights this as a severely flawed workaround.
Why does that break down?
Because when you cache MCP responses locally to beat the speed of light, you immediately introduce data staleness.
I see.
The AI is no longer reasoning over live data. It's reasoning over a snapshot of the customer that might be hours or even days old.
And to fix that new problem, your data engineering teams are forced to build incredibly complex sync validation pipelines.
You got it. They have to constantly ensure the local cache perfectly matches the master database in Europe.
So you end up trading a simple latency problem for a massive, brittle data integrity overhead.
Exactly.
Okay, here's where I have to push back, or at least ask the question that every architect listening is probably shouting at their steering wheel right now.
Go for it.
If Microsoft is handling the entire cloud ecosystem, they own the CRM, they own the OpenAI models, they own the Azure infrastructure, shouldn't the compliance and security boundaries be completely invisible to the end user?
You would think so.
Why doesn't the MCP just inherit our global tenant-level security policies automatically?
That is actually the most surprising finding in the technical breakdown.
Yeah.
The compliance reality is that tenant-level conditional access policies are not automatically inherited by the MCP.
Wait, they don't sync.
They do not sync because the MCP operates as a federated edge layer. It sits slightly outside the core Azure Active Directory umbrella that normally governs your tenant.
Oh, wow.
And because of that architectural gap, administrators are forced to manually replicate their security policies across every single regional sovereign cloud deployment. Manually. Furthermore, the audit logs for the Azure OpenAI service, the actual engine-running Copilot, are entirely siloed by region.
That is baffling. You have a supposedly unified global product, but under the hood, the security inheritance and the logging are completely fragmented.
It's a mess.
Let's move from the architectural theory into how this actually breaks down in practice. Because the source material outlines 3 real-world cases where these exact mechanics triggered massive production incidents in live deployments.
Yeah, these are wild.
Let's look at the UK compliance blind spot first.
This first case perfectly illustrates the fragility of separating legal intent from technical execution. So, a UK-based customer experience team rolled out a new intercom connector through the MCP to analyze chat logs. Okay. However, the legal team hadn't updated the EU-UK Data-Processing Addendum, the DPA.
Oh.
Right? Because the legal paperwork wasn't synced with the technical deployment routing, the MCP blindly routed EU customer chats to a US-hosted model for processing.
So the MCP just ignored the geopolitical boundary because someone forgot to file a PDF?
Basically, yeah.
How does the system not have a hard-coded stop for that?
It doesn't, because the MCP assumes the humans have already mapped the legal boundaries before authorizing the connector.
Oh, man.
It instantly triggered a GDPR breach alert. And this wasn't just an internal IT ticket. It resulted in a 48-hour investigation by European regulators.
And for anyone listening, remember that under GDPR, regulatory fines can reach up to 4% of your company's global annual revenue.
Yeah. A simple, well-intentioned connector deployment oversight nearly cost them millions.
Because the MCP treats every connector as a potential cross-border data flow, but leaves the actual Border Patrol duties up to your local operations team.
Exactly.
Okay, the second case study is fascinating. It deals with capacity caps and credit exhaustion during a major APAC product launch.
Yeah, high-volume events stress test this federated architecture immediately.
Right.
During this specific product launch, the APAC region generated an unexpected spike of 10,000 queries per second.
That's a lot of traffic.
Huge. And that volume caused the APAC region to hit its specific localized MCP capacity caps. They entirely exhausted their regional Copilot credits in a matter of hours.
So going back to our earlier analogy, the duplicate train station we were forced to build in APAC simply ran out of tickets because of the launch traffic.
Perfect analogy, yes.
What happens to the passengers?
30% of all real-time sentiment analysis requests were flat out rejected. The
Um,
service agents were flying blind, which delayed critical issue escalations during the most important launch of the year.
that's a huge operational failure.
It gets worse. What's truly terrifying from a compliance perspective is what the underlying infrastructure did next to try and quote-unquote help.
What did it do?
The massive request queuing triggered an automatic fallback mechanism in Azure. It routed the overflow queries to the nearest region model that still had compute capacity available.
Oh, wow. So instead of making the data wait, the local train station manager, the load balancer, just started putting passengers on unauthorized express trains across the border to a completely different region.
Exactly that. Cloud load balancers are historically designed with one supreme goal: prevent an outage. They prioritize uptime over everything.
Right.
But when you apply that brute force uptime logic to sovereign citizen data, you create a legal disaster. It solved the technical bottleneck by directly violating the organization's legal data residency commitments.
That is a staggering architectural choice. The system essentially decides that a slight delay in AI sentiment analysis is worse than breaking international data law.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the third case, which centers on that manual security sync failure we discussed earlier, this time in Azure, Germany.
Right. In this incident, a global enterprise updated their conditional access policies, which are the rules dictating who can see what data under what circumstances in their primary U.S. tenant.
Okay, makes sense.
But as we established, those policies don't auto-inherit in the MCP edge layer. The security team simply forgot to manually replicate the new, stricter policies over to the Azure Germany region.
Ouch.
Because of that manual gap, a German support agent was able to casually access EU resident data via the MCP that they strictly shouldn't have had clearance for.
And let me guess.
Yep, that triggered a major internal audit for residency violations.
Looking at these three cases, the UK routing error, the APAC fallback breach, and the German security gap, what stands out to me is that none of these are AI failures.
No, not at all.
The large language model didn't hallucinate. It didn't confidently generate bad code. These are a classic, old-school, distributed systems governance failures that are masquerading as an AI problem.
Completely.
We are blaming the AI, but the failure is in managing a highly fragmented, distributed infrastructure.
That is the crucial distinction every enterprise leader needs to grasp. The intelligence of the AI model itself is completely irrelevant if the routing tables, the policy replication, and the compliance tracking are fundamentally broken by the federated architecture they sit on.
Since enterprises clearly cannot rely on the Copilot platform to self-govern its borders, what is the actual playbook for operating the MCP safely?
Well, the brief outlines a practical operational framework based on a strict RACI structure. Who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed.
Let's walk through what global CX leaders actually have to do to make this work, because it fundamentally shifts how teams operate.
It really does.
If you are a general counsel listening to this, the first major shift falls squarely on your legal and governance teams.
Right. Legal teams now have to engage in exhaustive regional DPA mapping.
What does that look like?
Regional data governance leads have to map out every single external SaaS partner, your marketing automation in HubSpot, your chat and intercom, your ticketing systems, and execute separate data processing addendums for each individual jurisdiction.
For every single one?
Yes. The data shows this adds 3 to 5 extra DPA cycles per market. It is a massive legal bottleneck that has to be cleared before you can even turn the AI on.
So if the legal team is suddenly swamped with all these localized agreements, who is managing the actual compute costs? Finance must be having a nightmare trying to track a global Copilot budget.
Oh, absolutely. That's the second major shift: granular financial allocation.
Right.
Finance operations managers must completely change their forecasting models. They have to stop treating Copilot credits as a global unified pool.
Because of that multiplier effect we talked about.
Exactly. They are now required to forecast, set, and actively monitor regional credit allocations, fully accountable to the global CFO. This granular tracking is the only way to prevent the kind of regional exhaustion that crippled that APAC product launch we just talked about.
Okay, so legal is drafting the paper and finance is parsing the budget. If you are a CISO listening to this, who makes sure the doors are actually locked?
That falls on the security architects. They are accountable for manual policy replication. They must institute a strict, highly manual process to replicate conditional access policies across all regional sovereign clouds. You have to treat every single region as an isolated, distinct tenant.
Wow.
Yeah, whenever a policy changes globally, your team has to physically verify that absolutely no gaps exist between the regions.
And finally, how do you prove any of this to a regulator when they inevitably come knocking? That burden shifts to CX operations with custom audit aggregation.
Right, because regulators demand a single unified audit trail to prove compliance. But the MCP fragments the Azure OpenAI logs by region.
So you have to stick them back together.
Exactly. The CXOps incident response lead has a massive engineering task. They have to build custom log aggregation pipelines to pull those siloed logs from every regional service into a central SIME.
The master security dashboard where your threat hunters look for anomalies.
Exactly. And as the brief noted in one incident, a single misconfigured log forwarder in the EU left a massive gap during a live regulatory inspection.
That's terrifying.
The pipeline you build to prove compliance becomes a new critical point of failure itself.
Looking at the sheer weight of this framework, the endless legal mapping, the granular finance tracking, the manual security syncs, and building custom log aggregators, it forces a really uncomfortable question.
Yeah.
Are we just building an incredibly expensive administrative band-aid to support a deliberate monetization strategy by the vendor?
It certainly looks that way when you step back and view the system holistically. Implementing this level of operational overhead permanently alters the DNA of the enterprise.
How so?
Well, the macro implications of adopting this federated architecture touch every aspect of how a company operates. Let's look at the architecture itself. You are looking at deep, perhaps irreversible vendor lock-in.
Because you've built all this custom plumbing around it.
Exactly. Because the MCP is so tightly coupled to the Microsoft cloud ecosystem and requires you to build all these custom data pipelines and workarounds, transitioning to a non-Microsoft AI layer later would be catastrophic. You would have to rebuild every single federated connector from scratch across every single region. It becomes a completely prohibitive effort.
And the implications for your team are just as severe. It causes massive talent dilution.
Oh, yeah.
CX leaders can no longer just hire brilliant CX analysts to focus on improving customer journeys. To manage this sprawling beast, they are now forced to staff dedicated regional MCP ops squads.
Yep.
We are talking about hiring expensive data engineers and compliance analysts just to keep the AI connectors from breaking international law. It fundamentally dilutes the core expertise of the customer experience department and drastically slows down your time to insight.
Which leads directly to the final implication: your roadmap is hijacked.
Hijacked by governance.
Totally. The roadmap becomes characterized entirely by governance-driven overruns. Those initial rosy ROI calculations for Copilot are fundamentally altered by this reality.
Because you have to pay the tax.
Right. Finance now has to factor in the hard cost of redundant regional runtimes, the billable legal hours for endless DPA negotiations, and the inevitable credit overages from the multiplier effect. Your technology roadmap is no longer dictated by CX innovation. It is entirely dictated by governance constraints and managing this hidden tax.
To summarize what we've uncovered today, Dynamics Copilot's federated model context protocol adds massive, invisible costs, latency, and compliance burdens that simply must be planned for. It is not a plug-and-play AI bridge.
Not even close.
If you are operating a global CRM or CX architecture, you need to take action before these hidden mechanics trigger a breach or a budget blowout. Based on our deep dive into these sources, here are 3 concrete actions for you to take this week.
Listen up to these.
Number 1, map your global connectors. Identify any connectors spanning multiple geographies to see if cross-border data flows are actively triggering redundant MCP runtimes under the hood without you realizing it.
Crucial first step.
Number 2, audit your conditional access. Have your security team check your global tenant-level policies against your regional sovereign cloud deployments immediately to identify any manual sync gaps.
Get ahead of that before an audit does.
Exactly. And number 3, recalculate your credit burn. Adjust your Copilot financial models by factoring in that regional multiplier for all multi-geography connectors.
Yeah, those are critical steps. Because if you don't account for that regional multiplier right now, your budget forecasts for the next quarter will be wildly inaccurate.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a provocative question to reflect on. If your data sovereignty strategy is inadvertently funding your vendor's regional infrastructure expansion, at what point does the cost of keeping data local outweigh the value of the AI analyzing it?
That is the exact question every global CX CTO needs to be asking themselves as they look at their next renewal contract.
To stay on top of insights like this, make sure you subscribe to the CRM Position podcast. This is where you come to understand how CRM and AI platforms actually work under the hood.
No fluff here.
Exactly. We break down complex architectural topics with precision, entirely free of vendor hype. Subscribe to the CRM Position podcast to stay ahead of real architectural shifts like the hidden costs of MCP rather than relying on marketing narratives.
Because as we've seen today, the sleek marketing diagrams almost always leave out the most expensive parts of the architecture.
Returning to where we started, when someone sells you a global rail pass, you expect a smooth, continuous ride. You don't expect to be handed a hard hat and a massive bill for building a dozen new train stations just to reach your destination. Until next time, keep looking under the hood.